Most people were taught that the Ottoman Empire died in the mud of Gallipoli, the cross, the burning sands of the Arabian desert. We were told that 4 centuries of imperial rule simply disintegrated the sheer weight of Allied artillery. Ethnic uprisings, the chaotic climax of World War I. That is the standard textbook version of history. It is dramatic, it is heroic, it places the collapse entirely on the battlefield. But if you step away from the military maps, La Sagrada Mufio, and walk into the dimly lit banking chambers of Constantinople, 30 years before the first shot of the Great War was ever fired, you find a very different, far colder reality. The Ottoman Empire was not conquered from the outside by invading armies. Its sovereignty had already been signed away, line by line, inside a private debt office overlooking the Golden Horn. December 1881, the Sultan signed an imperial decree known as Muharram. It was not a military surrender, and not a single foreign soldier had breached the walls of the capital. Yet, that single document surrendered the financial independence of an entire global empire. It handed absolute legal authority over the empire's internal tax revenues to a council of 7 European bankers. From that moment on, whenever an Anatolian peasant harvested silk, a Syrian farmer gathered tobacco, a fisherman, or a fisherman cast his net into the Aegean Sea, the taxes collected did not go to the imperial treasury in Istanbul, Amelia. They were deposited directly into foreign accounts in London, Paris, Berlin, to service an insurmountable mountain of compound interest. This is the missing chapter of the Ottoman collapse. A story not of battlefield heroics, but of predatory bond underwriting, reckless palace spending, and the largest sovereign foreclosure in modern history. To understand how 7 foreign financiers took the keys to an imperial state, we have to follow the very first gold sovereign that entered the Sultan's hands in 1854. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire had operated on an ancient, strictly self-contained financial philosophy. It minted its own gold and silver coinage, collected taxes through local governors, and strictly avoided borrowing money from foreign nations. The sultans viewed external debt not merely as a commercial transaction, but as a fatal final compromise of Islamic sovereignty. Sagrada Familia. Even during catastrophic wars with the Russian Empire throughout the 18th and early 19th centuries, the Sublime Porte preferred currency, debasement and emergency domestic levies over foreign credit. But in 1853, the geopolitical landscape fractured. Tsar Nicholas I of Russia launched a massive invasion of the Danubian principalities, threatening to dismantle the Ottoman Empire once and for all. Britain and France rushed to the Sultan's defense, not out of altruism, but to prevent Russian warships from seizing the Bosphorus Strait and cutting British trade routes to India. The Crimean War became the first modern, industrialized conflict in history. It demanded ironclad steamships, modem telegraph networks, and massive artillery batteries, firing thousands of shells per day. Within months, the Ottoman treasury was completely burned through. The Sultan could no longer to feed his soldiers in the Crimean trenches, let alone pay for modern British-made rifles. In London and Paris, new class of merchant bankers smelled an unprecedented financial opportunity. They approached the Ottoman Grand Vizier with an alluring proposition: borrow modern capital on the European bond market to save the empire from the Russian Tsars. In August 1854, Sultan Abdulmejid succumbed to the financial pressure, signing the first foreign loan agreement in Ottoman history. On paper, the 1854 Crimean loan had a nominal value of £3 million, carrying an annual interest rate of 6%. Solto Corruzio. To the Sultan, it looked like a lifeline that would purchase modern European cannons. To the underwriting syndicate in London, was structured with predatory precision. The bonds were sold at a steep discount of 80% of their face value. This meant the Ottoman treasury received only £2.8 million in actual cash, drachman, yet was legally bound to pay annual interest on the full £3 million. Furthermore, the British bankers demanded hard collateral before releasing a single gold coin. The Sultan was forced to pledge the entire tribute payment from Egypt, alongside the customs duties of the vital port of Smyrna, directly into the Bank of England as security. If the Sultan failed to pay, foreign bankers held the legal right to intercept the tax revenues of his richest provinces. The money arrived in Constantinople. The Russian assault was repelled. The Crimean War ended in victory for the Allied coalition. The Sultan had saved his borders, but he had opened the gates of an incurable imperial addiction. Once the credit mechanism was established, borrowing was no longer treated as a temporary wartime emergency. Parar, it transformed into the primary engine of state survival. Between 1854 and 1875, over a span of just 21 years, the Ottoman government issued 14 major foreign loans. The nominal debt on the London and Paris stock exchanges skyrocketed to over £200 million. Yet, after accounting for underwriting fees, banking commissions, and catastrophic issue discounts, Sagrada Familia, the actual cash that ever reached Istanbul was less than £100 million. Where did this torrent of borrowed European gold actually go? Sail here. A portion was spent on modernizing the navy with British ironclads and importing German Krupp artillery pieces to reinforce the Danube frontier. However, a massive fraction was consumed by an illusion of imperial grandeur. Sultan Abdulmejid Pirne, determined to prove to Victorian Europe that his empire was equal to the West in sophistication, abandoned the traditional Topkapi Palace. On the shores of the Bosphorus, he constructed the Dolmabahçe Palace, an opulent monument of neoclassical marble and gold leaf. Dolmabahçe swallowed 35 tons of pure gold and 400 tons of silver in interior decoration alone. It housed the world's largest Bohemian crystal chandelier, a fortune gift from Queen Victoria, suspended under a ceiling covered in gold leaf. Every marble column, every crystal balustrade, releja, and every gilded ballroom was funded entirely by short-term European loans issued at compounding interest, while the court banqueted beneath crystal chandeliers. Soldiers, patrolling the snowy borders of the Balkans, were marching in rags, their salaries months in arrears. To bridge the chronic budget deficits between major foreign bond issues, the Porte turned to an elusive domestic syndicate known as the Galata Bankers. Operating along Bankalar Kadesi in the Galata district of Istanbul, these Greek, Armenian, and Levantine financiers offered short-term emergency advances. Their terms were merciless, charging effective interest rates between 12 and 18%. The imperial government fell into the classic sovereign debt trap, taking out high-interest short-term loans from Galata just to pay the annual coupons on its long-term debt in London. By 1874, the arithmetic of compound interest had achieved what no Russian Tsar could ever accomplish. The annual debt service alone required £14 million. The total tax revenue collected from the entire empire was barely £18 million. Over 80% of every tax coin collected across 3 continents was legally owed to European bondholders before a single civil servant or soldier could be paid. The imperial machine was running entirely on the assumption that London and Paris would continuously issue new loans to refinance the old ones. Then, the global financial architecture snapped. In May 1873, the Vienna Stock Exchange crashed, triggering the panic of 1873, the first truly global industrial depression. Liquidity dried up overnight in London, Frankfurt, and Paris. Investors panicked, credit lines froze. European banks abruptly refused to underwrite any new Ottoman bond issues. The rollover scheme had hit a mathematical wall. Inside the Sublime Porte, panic was absolute. On October 6, 1875, Grand Vizier Mahmud Nedim Pasha issued the infamous Ramazan Decree. Yo Sagrada Familia. The Ottoman Empire announced that it could no longer pay its debt obligations in full. It unilaterally slashed all coupon payments by 50%, though offering to pay the remaining balance in 5-year government scrip. Within months, even that promise was broken. The Ottoman Empire had entered formal, unconditional, sovereign default. The reaction across Europe was swift, coordinated, and furious. Also, hundreds of thousands of middle-class bondholders in Britain and France saw their life savings evaporate on the stock exchange floor. Editorials in the London Times and Le Figaro branded the Sultan an untrustworthy bankrupt, demanding immediate military intervention to recover bondholder capital. Sensing the financial paralysis of the Sublime Porte, the Russian Empire struck in 1877, initiating the Russo-Turkish War. Bankrupt, unable to secure foreign credit for ammunition, facing mutinous, unpaid troops, The Ottoman armies collapsed in the Balkans. Russian forces advanced to San Stefano, within sight of the minarets of Constantinople. The Treaty of Berlin, in 1878, officially stripped the Ottoman Empire of nearly 2/5 of its territory and 1/5 of its population. Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Montenegro were granted independence, while Bulgaria was established as an autonomous principality. Yet, behind the diplomatic speeches in Berlin, the European powers made one thing abundantly clear to the new Sultan, Abdulhamid II. The territorial partition of the empire was secondary to the settlement of the unpaid debt. The British and French delegations inserted Article 18 into the Berlin Treaty, legally obligating the Porte to negotiate a comprehensive debt settlement with foreign creditors. European gunboats did not need to occupy Constantinople. The financial leverage held by the bondholder committees was far more lethal than an armada. Without access to international maritime insurance and European capital, the empire could not import coal, operate its ports, or purchase grain. After 3 years of brutal closed-door negotiations in Istanbul, the Sultan bowed to the inevitable. December 20, 1851, Sultan Abdulhamid II issued the historic Decree of Muharram. This decree established the Duyunyu Umumiye Iwa, known internationally as the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, or OBDA. The OPDA was not a consulting agency, nor was it a temporary advisory committee. It was an autonomous, supranational financial corporation operating directly within the sovereign territory of the Ottoman Empire. The administration was governed by a permanent council of 7 members representing British, French, German, Austrian, Italian, Dutch bondholders, and 1 symbolic Ottoman representative. The Decree of Muharram stripped the Ottoman Ministry of Finance of its most lucrative domestic revenue streams, transferring them exclusively and indefinitely to the OPDA. These became known as the 6 indirect taxes. The OPDA was granted total ownership and collection rights over the imperial salt monopoly, the alcohol excise, the stamp tax, the fisheries tax in Istanbul, the silk tax in Bursa, the entire tobacco monopoly. To enforce this confiscation, the OPDA constructed an enormous bureaucratic apparatus. It established over 5,000 regional offices across Anatolia, the Balkans, and the Middle East, employing more than 5,000 direct tax collectors and armed customs agents. By 1900, the OPDA employed more personnel within the Ottoman borders than the imperial government's own Ministry of Finance. Lascelles, a foreign corporate council, now controlled nearly 1/3 of all public revenue generated in the empire. Every morning, the OPDA headquarters, a massive, fortress-like stone complex designed by architect Alexandre Valauri, overlooking the Golden Horn, opened its vaults. Tax revenues collected from Ottoman citizens were sorted, recorded, and wired directly to banks in Paris and London to service the restructured debt. The Sultan was reduced to a tenant inside his own palace, receiving whatever fiscal scraps the European Debt Council chose to release. Having conquered the state's internal revenues, the European capital turned its sights